Welcome to Mechanical Breakdown, where we analyze the different pieces of Dungeons and Dragons mechanics and how they work at the table. To start with, we're going to be looking at armor class, which is this small shield here, and what that means with hitting opponents, attacking, defending, how damage may apply here. And to start with, we have our half-elf fighter who's going to be taking a few hits from a couple of attacks and what those different attacks mean. So our attacker in this instance is a orc wielding a javelin who is attacking from range, which does not affect the roll in this case. But normally, attacking with a ranged weapon would work on dexterity rather than strength, which is an orc is more preferred to strength. So to start with, if we bring up our dice here, we will have make an attack roll. And this roll was a 9. Now the thing about this roll here is the roll has a modifier of +5 on an orc. In this case, we have a 14. What does this mean for our armor class of 16? So what's going to happen here is the armor class of 16 means, first off, this is a failure. And that means there will be no damage taken. So if the orc threw his spear towards our fighter and rolled this 14, because our armor class is 16, which is there, there is no damage taken. Now, if we have a success like this, first off, you need to determine, is this a crit? And in this case, this orc has no fighter skills, so there would be no crit here. So this is a standard hit. This passes the AC of 16, and then we would roll damage. So in this case, a spear or a javelin would do 1d6 plus 5. So if we roll dice here, you would deal 7 damage. So you can describe the spear is launched from the orc's hand and collides with, in the chink of your armor just underneath your shoulder, dealing a total of 7 damage. And if you take this damage, you would go to your character sheet here, with your health, in the top right corner here, you would take 7 damage. That's a lot for a first level fighter, so this might be a little much. Now let's say you're rolling, and from circumstances, you end up rolling, so let's just say this is an exact 16. This matches the armor class. So if these were both the same, what does that mean for our fighter? Does that change any of these damage rolls? Now it does change some things. It's not going to change a lot. Now if in the event that this was 20, it would be called a critical hit. And a critical hit would mean that the damage maxed out, and then you would roll another set of damage dice. So in this case, the javelin would be a 6, and plus 5, making it 11. Plus 5, sorry. It would be plus 3, because of the efficiency of this orc is plus 2. So you would have 9 plus 4. And 9 plus 4 is 13. You do 13 damage, killing the fighter. So if this happened to be a total of 16, that would be called, depends on the DM for this, but a glancing hit. What a glancing hit means is you would take your damage, and after you roll damage, you would need to cut that in half as if you had resistances. And this applies before you do resistances. So if you hit an enemy with a glancing hit and happen to deal 5 damage, That would first be cut in half, rounding up, so 3. Then, if they had resistance to whatever damage you did, they would cut it in half again. Therefore, they would only deal 2. So what this means is there's a little bit of flexibility with bringing the different types of attacks into consideration when dealing with armor class. Lighter armor characters will be some that take more standard and critical hits versus some of high armor class. They'll most likely take more glancing blows and stuff like that. Kind of describing how the guy wearing no armor is going to take a lot more damage than the guy wearing heavy plate, because the heavy plate defends against a lot more attacks. Now, as a dungeon master, how do you speed this up? Because this takes a bit. You have to roll, you have to ask, does this hit? If so, what is you roll damage? Now, something that I, as a DM that I have found online, was to, at the start of the game, write down the armor class of every character, as well as any resistances or immunities they have. So for example, if this fighter happened to have resistance to piercing damage, the damage done by a javelin, you would cut it in half. Now what this means is when you roll with your dice roller, they add 3, you then cut this in half. And then you could describe that, but damage to them however you wish. Now, if this damage is rolled and you want to speed this up, so instead of rolling and saying this is, let's say, 14 hit, you roll damage, you take 3 damage, you roll all of them at the same time. And then you say, the orc lands a light blow that bounces off your shoulder, dealing 2 damage from the impact. Or the attack gets underneath your shield and cuts into your ribs, dealing a total of 6 damage. So with any skills you have here, that apply to, for example, acrobatics or athletics, would be the main 2, and sleight of hand. There's a minor rule that I use that I recommend a lot of DMs using is, depending on the situation, allowing acrobatics or sleight of hand or athletics to affect the outcome of an attack. So for example, if you're using a dagger and you want to stab someone in secret, you're a rogue or it's a stealth type mission and you don't want there to be a lot of noise. Normally you would roll a sleight of hand check in order to determine if this attack is noticed or not by anyone else, or this guy yells or something. What I would recommend doing instead is having them roll a standard attack roll. So let's say the attack roll with this hidden roll, okay, first off that's a nat 20. Let's say their proficiency is +4. This fighter has here we go, on the rapier, their proficiency is +6. So instead of adding the +4 from their roll to sleight of hand, you add 6, because they have a 6 for proficiency, and then instead you add half of their total modifier to sleight of hand, or stealth, whatever is more applicable. In this case, we'll use sleight of hand. So it becomes +8. So this rolls a 28, which is very hard to beat. So there's most likely no way that a person would notice unless they have some extremely powerful magic or other senses to notice your attack. Now, how does this apply to acrobatics and athletics? Well, the idea here is a move that if there's a person with a high armor class and you're trying to do a feint, you're trying to swing your sword as if you're going for one spot and then actually attacking at a different spot. What that means is instead you would add half your acrobatics to the check. So in this case, it would stay +8 because we're wielding a rapier, which is +6 in this case to our fighter. We have 20 on our roll. We add 8, becomes to 28. Now, some DMs may not like this rule, and this is something where it's very limited in some of its capability. For example, you can't reward every attack with this little bonus modifier. Like a athletics check, or adding half your athletics to a roll could be very powerful. So this is where do you draw the line with adding this roll to the roll? So in this case, what I would say to do is athletics only applies to strength-based weapons. Acrobatics only applies to dexterity-based weapons, and sleight of hand only applies to if you're trying to keep it stealthy, or stealth if you prefer that, if that one happens to be higher. Now, if you're rolling this with this rule, and you decide to take the route of allowing this half modifier, a good idea is to take into account how the player describes what they're doing. So if they say they want to do a feint attack, to use acrobatics to improve their check on do they hit or not, ask them, okay, so how do you do this feint? And listen to their description, if they want to act it out or describe how they move their weapon in order to do this feint. That determines what the decision is to allow a modifier or not. So if they tell you, I'm going to bring a wild swing towards his head and then go for a stab when he goes to block this, I would allow that. But if they said, I'm going to go for a jab at the face and then swing for his side, that one would be one I would say is not going to work, because he'd see the jab, block, and then he'd see coming for a wide swing. It's all on how they describe their attack in this instance that you may give them a small boost or not. And this may not matter to high-level characters when their modifiers are +7s, +8s. This might just be a small boost. But even at low levels, having a benefit like this, where you can stack up a high modifier relatively quickly that may give you a slight boost, is always good. And one other thing would be if they use this constantly. If they start to use this acrobatics trick over and over again on enemies, have them start to wise up to the fact that there may be feints. Like if you are fighting the town guards, they're going to kind of get the idea, because they have some training in weaponry and fighting, that they would know when there's a feint and when there's not. They'd start to get the idea. Maybe not every soldier would. Maybe the generic Joe, the town guard, isn't going to notice, but the captain who is fighting with him will know what to do. In this case, a high-level fighter that you're dueling against will obviously know what this is going to be for an attack, and in that case, you don't apply the modifier. And at the same time, the opposite can be true. If you decide that the feint is something they can do as an action for an enemy, such as this fighter that you are dueling against, you could add some of their skill modifier there. And if you don't have an acrobatics skill listed out, just dex plus their proficiency. If they have proficiency, if they don't, it's just their dex. So in this case, it would be 2. And yeah, so if this rule seems a little complicated, the way I break it down is, how do they describe the attack? Does it get a modifier? They roll attack. Does it fail? No. Does it pass? Yes. Is it equal to or more? It's equal to half damage. Move on. And so maybe asking if this modifier to the attack roll, and if in this case, if I attacked my rapier and I got the acrobatics boost, does this rule apply to damage? And does not. Damage only applies to damage. Attack roll only applies to attack roll. So you don't add your proficiency to an attack roll. So that's the armor class side of things. Now let's say our fighter is attacking. And some people don't like what's called metagaming, which is where people are like, well, I know outside of game that this guy is going to have an armor class of 14 because it took me a 15 to hit him. So his armor class is most likely a 14 because my roll earlier of 12 didn't hit. So he's at a 13 or 14 AC. So they would know that's what that type of metagaming isn't important here because it's helpful. They're being logical in real life. But as their character would know, that's not going to, they don't know armor class. So if they are, that's not important to the attack rolls. But if they are telling you that because of specific reason, they have decided that their character has some sort of priority or extra capability to their attack roll because of a metagaming reason, tell them flat out that is not how it works. If it's creative enough that it makes sense, like if it's something that the DM is fine with, go ahead. But when it comes to attack rolls, do not let metagaming get in the way. Like really with anything, don't let metagaming get in the way. A metagamer who determines AC to kind of get an idea of what enemies are the tougher ones is fine. That could be described as their character figuring out this guy's got a lot harder hide than the rest of them, or his armor is of good quality, or he's wearing, like if he's wearing plate, it's kind of obvious he's going to take a big hit. And the metagamer who uses, like, well, we're standing on a cliff and I stabbed him, therefore he's going to stumble back and fall off the cliff. That's up to the DM. Do not allow players to decide what happens to enemies unless the DM says, okay, so what do you do to this guy? What happens to him because of this? That's where you would use metagaming to affect your attack rolls. And this is very up to discretion. You could forego the entirety of adding modifiers, allowing metagame to affect your rolls. But if you are working with armor class, I would recommend to every DM just to use the system here of doesn't match, or is it above or below, and then from there applying damage. And that'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe and turn on the bell. Everyone knows the drill. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.